ozone is a gas that can be applied a lot of different ways into the body that's helpful for stimulating homeostasis. What it's trying to do is it's trying to give you a little bit of a stress, and then your body responds to that stress by balancing out. Same thing with exercise or a sauna. It's a stress response therapy.
I had it done through the drip through the blood, and I noticed incredible effects like better energy, cognition, mentally was there. And this was probably for a good solid week and a half, 2 weeks or so. Then I've tried with a couple other patients, and I've seen nothing but really good results throughout.
So about 20 to 30% of people have a really positive response the first time. Some people, it's 10 minutes after, and they're like, they get overwhelming sense of wellness. People get after taking it, and it's almost this euphoric feeling, that dose of oxygen, they get oxygen delivery to different parts, and your body can respond to that really well.
I know Lyme's patients, it's like the only thing that has helped their fatigue from what I was experiencing in clinic, especially through IV. And I know you had mentioned that too. You had mentioned that IV was a little more efficient.
We saw an opportunity of, hey, we can provide a lot of information on people's biology, and then we can now map that to what is going to be the most effective for them. We don't have a full list complete. There might be some type of red light therapy or green light therapy that we don't have mapped in here, but we're working on getting as much in there as we can. In the future, I anticipate this being like, once we get approval and go through the processes and kind of Trojan horse it a little bit, that we'll be able to advise that chemotherapy at this dose might be the best in this very localized area, or not at all. Rather than
for each person, you're saying. So you simulate this external for what it could happen internally for a person.
Yeah, so what we do, it's called digital twinning. This is like really cutting edge stuff.
Welcome to the Functional Code, your go-to source for decoding optimal health. Join Dr. Addy and Dr. Jace as they break down the science behind pain, performance, longevity, and more, making complex concepts easy for you to understand and apply in your life. Your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the Functional Code.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Functional Code. We have an exciting guest for you guys. Micah Lowe is here. Micah and I might have met at a conference 10 years ago. We still are trying to figure that out, but his dad was doing a conference there, and I got to learn all about Ozone and everything else that they've been doing. Micah is a founder of Simply O3. It's an accessible ozone therapy medical device company inspired by his father's innovative approach, drawn to using ozone potential during nursing school, but then he left to focus on developing affordable, reliable ozone equipment. And Simply O3's mission is to provide user-friendly ozone therapy tools that support health and wellness, now used in over 10,000 medical practices, including the one that I was in early on in my clinical career, which really was quite amazing. Mike has also co-founded Honest O3, oxygen-rich care line, expanding ozone benefits into cosmetics, which I've also used and love. Lastly, he is currently the CEO of Theriome. Did I say that correct?
Theriome. I switch back between the two. So whatever you want.
Focus on creating a future healthcare model that combines multi-omics, which we'll get to in a little bit about what that is, digital twinning for personalized health insights using big data and AI to analyze multi-omic samples collected. This approach helps physicians understand patient biology and identify the best interventions with the use of blockchain for data privacy, which I'm super excited to talk about too. Ladies and gentlemen, Micah, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate you. As always, I am Dr. Addy.
And I'm Dr. Jace. Yeah. So for the brief chance I got to meet Micah, super awesome individual. Got a chance to consume a lot of his content, who's definitely an awesome family man, travels around and just gives back to that profession and healthcare itself too. Sure the challenges come with great assault on that one, but yeah, Micah, super, super grateful that you're here with us, and thank you so much for your time, man.
Seriously.
So as we're going to dive into some of the ozone aspects and how he's helping doctors, and then some of the upcoming newer stuff that he's spending his time on as well too. Micah, let's get to know your story. I guess, what is a little bit of your background and what parts of your journey have shaped who you are today, if I may?
Yeah, I've been, like I mentioned, in ozone therapy for quite a while now. I've had a company in that for 10 years, and I'm 31, so that was around 21 that I actually started selling ozone equipment. But prior to that, my brother got pretty sick, so he had a brain cancer. And around 15, we found out it was this terminal deal, right? And so he started going through the medical system, Johns Hopkins, and they did a lot of good stuff. But when I was around 18 years old, I started to think, hey, would there be anything else that's helpful for Matt? Is there anything that's going to maybe slow the progression of this, increase quality of life, et cetera? And I was starting nursing school and that kind of stuff. So started to just talk with people. One of the guys that I ran into at our church recommended doing hyperbaric oxygen because his wife had some health issues that it was really helpful for. So yeah, Matt started to do hyperbaric oxygen, and bar none, it was the thing that had helped him the most to date in terms of his labs looked really good, his imaging looked really good, but the thing that was really noticeable is his quality of life metrics. So like sleep, cognitive thinking, etc. Because he had lost a lot through all these brain surgeries. I think at that point he had, I don't know, I lose count, but between 6 and 9, somewhere in there. So he had quite a few of those. And so he was a very different person. But hyperbaric oxygen really had a marked increase to where he was like becoming more himself, had more energy, all that kind of stuff. And then talking to the doctors as we're doing hyperbaric oxygen seems to really be really helpful. And just teasing it, hey, what else can we do? Can you help us with this? And figure out if there's some other stuff. And if that makes you feel good mentally, go enjoy your placebo. Yeah, we're going to do the real work. The flavor they had was just really arrogant. It's not something that the real doctors use. It's blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that kind of is, like they are really locked into their thing and not really considering this wider array of things. We just found something that was the most helpful thing that we found to date personally. And I'm not saying the surgeries and the other stuff didn't do anything, but that really improved his quality of life. Bar none, there wasn't anything that helped to the degree that did. So then it's, okay, so if this worked really well, and they don't even believe that, are there other things that work really well? And as my dad was involved in ultraviolet blood irradiation, which is this therapy, they take out some blood, they put it back, they expose it to UV light and then put it back into the body. Does a lot of cool stuff. But a lot of those doctors that were using that were doing ozone. So I was working with him, started to look into ozone a little bit more. Also something that was helpful for Matt in terms of quality of life, not to the degree that hyperbaric oxygen was, but the one thing I noticed with that, and I'm sorry, I'm rambling. It can't be a really long story. The one thing I noticed with that was like trying to get an understanding of it was really challenging because there was the ozone therapy. Yeah. And again, ozone, it was an adjacent to UBI, and we can go into like how it's used and all that kind of stuff. But the thing I noticed with that is there was a lot of research on it. So you go into Google Scholar or you'd find all sorts of studies on it, but there wasn't any place that you could go to be like, what is the deal with ozone and cancer? What is the deal with ozone and this indication or like this problem that's going on? And that was really, you just didn't find that. I would find like websites where they're like, ozone's a miracle drug that cures everything. And they'd have here's a list of 300 things that it cures the first time you look at it. And then you're like yeah. And so there was that flavor to it where there were the people that just really didn't understand it and would promote it like if it's suppressed by the medical system or not looked at by the medical system and there's a lot of research on it, then it must be like the cure-all. That's not the reality of it. It's just a good thing. But anyway, it was really tough to find the information. So what I started to do at that time was talking to doctors on the phone every day, working at my dad's company. And we were just a small outfit. It was me, my dad, and my other brother at that point. And that was like 6 or 7 years of development to get to that point to where I could make...
We're still talking Simply, or are we talking the UBI?
This is the UBI, and this is my transition into Simply 03. We're a small outfit to where I was making $15 an hour, that kind of thing, which was great at the time being 18. But yeah, so I was talking to the doctors, and what I started to do was just look at the research. They would ask questions about ozone stuff, and I had to learn that. Start to look at the research. After a while, I'm answering the same question all the time. I'm just going to start compiling it. So then you start to compile it. That, long story short, transferred into writing articles for them that was all cited. So it's, hey, here's the state of the art on ozone therapy and cancer, or this to the best of my ability, which wasn't much, but I knew as long as I put the source information in there and tried my best just to make sure that it was accurate, and that got better over time. But then that goes into how do we get equipment and all that kind of stuff. And that's how the company started.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I've used your products now for let's see, my first run-in with it was probably when I was like in my early 20s. I was working for a gentleman who purchased obviously your equipment after we went to your dad's conference. And I still remember just how, this is the one story that I've never gotten out of my head because it was burned in there. But we had a gentleman whose PSA was like 450. And that just means that he has an antigen that's high and more than likely has a chance of developing or has prostate cancer. And we were doing ozone treatments for that. And within 8 weeks, it dropped to 2, which you want it to be as close to 0 as possible. And to this day, I have never forgotten just how incredibly powerful that was for him, because he had given up, unfortunately. And just being able to see that so quickly after we get back from this conference, we're like, what are we going to do with it? Like, how does this work? Does it work? And then we go and we do something like that. And yeah, I'm just super, super grateful to have got to experience that early on. And now I'm sure since then, I've been following it as much as I can, the development of much larger integrations of ozone into the body, and just how else you can consume it and put it into the body, I'm sure has changed over those times too, and I'm sure we'll get to that too. But I am curious about one thing. So when you were in nursing school, was there things that you were learning that you may not now agree with, obviously, to this day? Or what has changed maybe as far as your philosophy? Has it changed? Or are there things that maybe look back on and think, wow, I learned a lot, but this is just so much different than what I thought getting into it?
Yeah, nursing school, yeah, so as far as the school of thought goes, a lot of it's made for the hospital system, which emergency medicine is great. I think everybody agrees with that. It's got its flaws just like everything else. But I think chronic disease management was the thing that was really like, what's going on here? That didn't make sense to me. So at that time, I had just read Frank Schallenberger's book, Type 2 Diabetes, something or other. I can't remember what the title is. But anyway, I remember asking somebody about metformin, diabetes, that kind of stuff. Hey, why do we just put people on metformin and increase their dosage over the course of their lifetime instead of, I don't know, just trying to figure this out. Like, how can we turn this into a thing where we actually reverse the disease? Because we know how to. We have the drugs already that are called diet and exercise, but we just put them on this drug and just let them go because, I don't know, they're treated as a lost cause. Like, oh, they have type 2 diabetes. People don't habituate the habits that they need to, and they're just going to keep going. So we'll just keep giving them drugs. And that's just the flair in the attitude. So I remember asking about that specifically and being like, at the time, it was probably a stupid question, but like, why don't we limit metformin to a 6-month window and then on the back end work with diet and exercise? And after that, they're not allowed, which again, probably a stupid idea because not everybody's going to follow through with that. But that was the question that the kind of idea I was trying to get across was like, why are we doing chronic disease management where we just put people on drugs when we already have a solution? Which is really what I was trying to get to. And their response essentially was, there's not a drug that cures type 2 diabetes yet. And it's like, that just, to me, it made me glitch a little bit because I was like, you don't even understand my question. We already have the cure. But yeah, just generally, I think the school of thought in chronic disease management is fraught with just taking care of symptoms and not really getting down to the root of the problem. And this whole industry is a pendulum swing, and the response to that is, F you guys, you're not taking care of people in the way they do. And obviously there's billions of dollars spent on cash pay because people care about that. And I think as people are becoming more knowledgeable and understanding what health is and a little bit of the warranted mistrust in pharmaceuticals.
That big pharma is no joke. Like,
Yeah.
we say this so often too, like when you are bringing up some of these points, you have to look where the root source is. The hospitals are a business, and almost like the doctors have to abide by what their superiors say, and then they regulate funding, and it's just a whole cascade of things. Unfortunate.
And there's money to be made on the permanence of drugs, especially in those cases like type 2 diabetes, where they know more than likely if they don't do diet and exercise, they're going to need that medication for long periods of times, which creates a retention of a customer. And that could also be looked at as far as, you think that they don't think like that. That's what a lot of people don't want it. Maybe they're blinded to the thought that some of those individuals who are in charge of helping people think like that. But at the end of the day, like you said, it is a business.
I know, and there's really basic things that people don't know. You can, if you are trying to lose weight and you struggle with it, one easy place to start that works for a lot of people is just by, after you eat, going on a walk. Yeah. And like that one thing, most people don't even know that. Like all you have to do is start walking after you eat, And most people, not everybody, will start to lose weight just by doing that one thing. And it sounds easy, diet and exercise, but for some reason, it's just not communicated very well that, hey, there's these pretty simple ways to approach some of these problems.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where some of the stuff that we go at with the podcast is just tools. So I'm glad you brought that up. Absolutely helps so many people. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Anything we can do to start the metabolism up again, especially at night and after a larger meal. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point on that one.
So did you always have this certain feeling towards medicine, or was it kind of the shift with when you were starting to look into therapies for your brother? Like your house, like household-wise growing up, have you always had this shift of thought towards medicine, or has that changed?
I love medicine. So, I mean, and I think what you're asking though is more about like the current school of thought that is more common. Yeah, and the lines blend all over the place. So I think the thing I try to be wary of is not locking myself into a box and saying like, I am of this school of thought, because I think the issue that comes along with, so we do that to make our thinking processes more simple. Like, I am this type of person, therefore I do this, or I think this, therefore I do this. Or with the recent election, people of a certain political party will say, I am red or I am blue, therefore I vote red or blue, rather than thinking about what are my values and what are the things that are important to me and how much does this person align with those things, would be a more complex way of thinking about it. But I think trying to answer your question, I think the thing that's changed for me over the years is just trying to find things that are really helpful for people, regardless of where it sits. I have a lot of mistrust for pharmaceutical institutions, a lot of mistrust for certain academic institutions. So I did this tour in the Biopharma Crescent, which is in North Carolina, and it was with this company that I'm essentially helping to consult, and they do stuff with ozone oils, which is really cool. They're from out of the country, so they're a little bit ignorant to the corruption that exists here. But it was interesting because I was like, I'll see what they come up with, because they want to go tour pharma and it's not going to happen, but whatever. If they want to go try, that's fine. They ended up getting this really stacked agenda where it's like, we're meeting with pharmaceutical companies, economic developers, different government officials. And I was like, I don't know how they figured that out. I do. It was through one of the economic development teams there that really helped them. They just thought that was the way into medicine here. So they just don't understand the landscape. And I was curious to see what would happen. So it wasn't a big deal. It was one trip. But anyway, just going through like touring, for example, there was this, man, I want to make this a little bit hazy so it's not super clear as to what it was. But there was this school, for college age people, that on the outside just looked like your normal school that you might go to. But going through and talking with the people, what we found was that it was really pretty much owned by Thermo Fisher. So they had done the initial funding on it, because at one point they said, if Thermo Fisher gives us a new protocol for workforce development, we could roll that out within 90 days. And that is a little bit of a red flag, because you're supposed to be this independent institution. The taxpayers are paying for students to go to this school, and the students think they're just going to a normal school, not realizing that it's really a marketing funnel for workforce development for pharma. So it's the illusion of choice. And so you start to mix in all these things and by the way, one of the guys for that school, I forget his position, gave us a ride in his brand new Escalade and stuff. And he's all dressed up and decked out. And it's like a $60,000 a year position. And he's got like the newest Escalade you can get. And anyway, my issue with that industry is that they're pretty much above lawsuits, like vaccines in particular. They can't get sued. So the incentive structure is such that they are not incentivized for safety and making sure things are good for people, and they can't get sued. And so I really just have a huge issue with how the incentive structures are set up there, because it's meant for corruption. And if you say it's not meant for corruption, at the very least, that the way that the incentives are set up to where you can't get punished and you can roll things out and just sell it to the public, it's like there's a high likelihood of corruption existing within that. I wouldn't have as much of an issue with some of the drug developments and things they're doing if they could get sued. Yeah, there's good safety standards around it that isn't just looking at, oh, the protein folded this way, therefore it's safe. What are the outcomes over a long duration of time? Let's look at those types of things. Because what you end up getting is you get companies like Purdue Pharma, who caused the opioid crisis, which, by the way, is still up and rolling. We drove by the factory that's still got steam coming out of it.
Big guy, he got slapped on the wrists, but everything else is still churning and burning.
Keep it rolling.
Yeah. One of the guys there, because I'm obviously, they don't know all my thoughts on their industry, but I'm just asking questions as I was there. I was like, so why are they still up and running? They did get punished. So the Sackler family, now they have to put all their proceeds to this kind of stuff. And shouldn't they be in prison? And they're like, we can't do that because then that scares all the other companies away. And then they'll go to some other country and just do it there.
They do upset.
And they killed a lot of people. I can't go kill a bunch of people and it's legal and I don't go to jail, So anyway, I know that's a long-winded way to answer your question, but that's really my issue with the conventional system is the way the incentive structures are set up, the inefficiencies of it, and the vizier that exists, that it's not a real thing. It's all these studies and things that are put out that don't necessarily correlate to people getting better.
And the ones they put out are sometimes altered, or the ones that they should be putting out are hidden behind a lock and key, and not many people get to ever see them, if ever. Yeah, especially with vaccinations and all those other things too. It's funny you were talking about that, and what it brought up in my head is almost like, are you a sports guy?
Little.
Yeah.
I mean,
Are you familiar with NIL deals where they're paying these college? Yeah. I'm like, is Farmer getting into NIL deals now, paying all these college kids to come on board to get in? That's just funny. This is what it reminded me of.
It's funny how that goes. So being in this industry for 10 plus years, and for those people that are listening at home, especially for the layman's terms, how would you best describe what ozone therapy is, and I guess how do you use that in your everyday life, either you or your family?
So ozone is a gas. Oxygen is O2. Pretty similar in its molecular makeup to oxygen, being O3, but it's in a gas form. So it's a little bit weird because most people are used to taking a supplement, a pill, or going on a run, and that's their form of exercise. But this can be applied a lot of different ways into the body. You extract this gas from a machine, can be applied into blood. They'll draw blood, put some of the ozone in, and then drip the blood back. You can put it into the ears for ear infections. You can drink ozone water for stomach infections and parasites, or ozonate even oil. So you can ozonate oil, and that stabilizes the ozone as a peroxide is what it's called. And then you can swallow that for stomach infections and that kind of thing. It's a really terrific anti-infection therapy, but and there's a lot of other stuff to it. Like it does immune modulation, oxygen efficiency, microcirculation improvements, and mitigates chronic oxidative stress, which is interesting. But yeah, I guess to be brief, ozone is a gas that can be applied a lot of different ways into the body that's helpful for stimulating homeostasis. What it's trying to do is it's trying to give you a little bit of a stress, and then your body responds to that stress by balancing out. Same thing with exercise or a sauna. It's a stress response therapy.
And that's, I know you've mentioned this in prior pods, where it's an oxidant, right? But you have like free radicals that are oxidizing and you treat it with an oxidant, but it's not so necessarily, it's the counteraction that it creates as far as causing a stress response. And that's the healing portion, correct?
Yeah, so like ozone doesn't float through your body doing all the stuff. That's the cool part, I think, about it, is that it's just stimulating your body to work more effectively. So it's an oxidant, and if people are familiar with oxidative stress, that's typically viewed as a bad thing. It is when it's out of whack. You need oxidative stress for immune function and various things. But the thought process is, so if chronic oxidative stress is bad, and a lot of people have it, why the heck would you use an oxidant to help with that? The reason is because even though it's an oxidant, it causes an antioxidant response. When you apply the ozone, it does create a mild acute oxidative stress, so a localized portion of stress. But then the body has a reaction to it where it's like, hey, I need to get up and get going and start producing antioxidants. So you see a huge increase in antioxidant production and the things that are more natural to the body. So in that way, it actually is more of an antioxidant response, even though you're using an oxidant to get that.
Is it also antipathogenic in the blood too?
So it's not the ozone itself. This is a little bit nuanced.
Yeah.
If I were to apply it onto this table or microphone or shirt, yes, it's going to kill bacteria, virus, whatever's living on that surface. Yeah, and same thing with the skin. So if there's a topical skin infection, you apply it, it's going to kill that stuff off. But when you apply it, say, in the form of an IV, so you've pulled out some blood, you mixed in the ozone, and you drip it back, the ozone is used within milliseconds, so it's actually no longer ozone. But what it's doing is it's stimulating immune modulation. So if your immune system is not functioning properly to kill that infection or the thing that's there, then it's going to stimulate it to rise up a bit and to be able to take care of that infection. So it's an immune modulatory, because in the same case with autoimmune disorders, it's not just going to bump it up, it's actually going to bring it down. So that's the balancing effect that it's causing. So it's really your immune system, your body is the thing that's killing the infection. Ozone is just a catalyst.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I do want to say I've tried ozone once before. It's actually from a pain clinic. One of the providers came over and was just showing us a few things, and I had it done through the drip through the blood, and I noticed incredible effects like better energy, cognition, mentally was there. And this was probably for a good solid week and a half, 2 weeks or so. Then I've tried with a couple other patients, and I've seen nothing but really good results throughout. So I have nothing but awesome things to say about ozone. But I just want to put that plug out there for anyone that is thinking about it. Obviously, you probably want to talk to someone that knows what's going on with you and your body.
And not everybody has that. So about 20 to 30% of people have a really positive response the first time. Some people, it's 10 minutes after, and they're like, they get overwhelming sense of wellness. People get after taking it, and it's almost this euphoric feeling that people get, where they get that dose of oxygen, they get oxygen delivery to different parts, and your body can respond to that really well. But that's the minority of people. Most people have a really positive effect, like 4 to 6 plus treatments, and that's where most people are going to reap some sort of response to it. That's good.
I appreciate you for bringing that up. Thank you.
When I first had it, I felt like I ran a marathon. Like my lungs were sore, and it was in Utah, and the doc I was with, and he's, "You good?" I'm like, "I think so, but I feel like I just ran," because I was a runner, and I'm like, "I feel like I just ran 5 miles." Like I had been in the chair for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and it finally did go away after about 45 minutes. But I loved it, and yeah, that is usually something that I get when I do IV anyway. So I don't know why I get that, but Kim was a little worried because she didn't know what was going on.
Doc, I'm curious with the elevation. How long were you there for in Utah? And I think the elevation matters.
A few days.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no idea. I just remember what I felt, but most of the patients that we would treat, like you said, it would take a few sessions, maybe, like you said, +4, +5 sessions. But yeah, I still am amazed by the things that doctors are stating that it's helping with. And I know we could get into, and we might, a little bit on just every single thing that we've seen, I'm sure, in settings of how to help patients with ozone. But I am curious, because I feel like you're very well read and historian. I know Bocce had a lot of research on ozone, but are there any others that kind of first started to utilize ozone? And was it in the United States, or was it more in other countries when this first got started?
Yeah, the first literature I could find on it, I can't remember the exact date anymore. It's been a few years since I brushed up on this. I got into the kind of history of ozone for a little while, and then was like, oh, this is a lost cause. It's so fragmented in all these different languages. It was so hard to find stuff. But I did find some things that I had never seen anybody else reference, which was the first medical statement on ozone, that the earliest that has ever been found, which I think was 1874. And that was in Germany. It was a professor that was using it as an antiseptic for wounds and cuts and infections on the skin. And so there was some sort of transcript from his class talking about this, and I had to translate it, obviously, because I don't speak German. But yeah, so that was the first use I could find, was in Germany. Then speeding up to the 1890s, there was a guy in the UK that was working with ozonated oils. I think he called it Hydrozone or something like that. He has a booklet on it, like in applications and things like that. He was a business guy and a doctor. He had some experience in medicine, and he also was using it as an antiseptic. Then everybody references World War I, but that was like 50 years after its documented use, and we don't know the path that it took to get there. But this guy in World War I, he does have all these letters to different, like a French chemist and like different people remarking on the use of ozone for soldiers that had gunshot wounds, and so many people were dying from infections. So he was documenting some of its use, and it was Dr. Stoker. He was a brother of the guy who wrote Dracula. So he had some royal blood or something in there. I don't know. But anyway, this doctor, yeah, he was actually applying it to these soldiers and getting really good effects. So he was all hyped up about it. And so these letters you can find on the results that he was getting. And that's what most people refer to. A lot of people referred to Nikola Tesla, who had some patents on it, but I couldn't find like anything on like medical use or anything like that. But a lot of people hype it up just because people know who Nikola Tesla is. There's really no documented use of his medical understanding of it beyond just like patenting some machines and assumedly applying it then. But we don't really have anything from him other than patents. So that's some of the older use cases of it. After World War I, that did something that created interest in it, where people, because this is before, I'm pretty sure before penicillin and antibiotics as well, they were just looking for things that would help with these wounds, these infections that were killing so many people. And UBI, coincidentally, around the same time in the 20s and 30s, started to get some recognition. Yeah. There were all these things that were preceded antibiotic use, but antibiotic use, if you're in the trenches and you're going to chew something, you're going to take the pill over, like, you have to bring equipment out, you have to, like, and the equipment sucked at that time. I got the chance to see one of the old ozone generators, and it's just like UV lights that are really powerful that are just creating ozone into the air. So the application of it, obviously not nearly as easy or as good as what we have today. So anyway, but yeah, and they didn't know anything about antibiotics and how they affect, you're getting shot at, you're not thinking about your microbiome. So you're just taking the pill and cutting the infection, and that's great. But in the modern world, obviously some of those things probably shouldn't transfer over as much as they do. But yeah, that's a little bit about the history behind like its use. And then it started to get, in Italy for some reason, more studied under some of the scientists there. And then that established at University of Siena, people like Dr. Bacci, and he brought other people on board to research it. And he dedicated his career essentially to studying it for the purpose of setting the foundation so other people could work off that, which is awesome, because without him, none of this would be here today, because he really set the foundation biochemically, what's happening with ozone, safety of ozone, how to use it, etc. And we since then, and this is around 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s that he was writing, but since then have done a lot more work. But yeah, thanks to him, we currently have use of ozone.
And it's pretty well utilized over in Europe, a lot more than the United States, especially in hospital settings. Is that right?
More. It depends on the country. Okay. So like in Spain, for example, it is in some hospitals and in some places. In Italy, during the 2020 infection, stepping around the word, but during the 2020 infection in Italy, they gave the green light for them to be able to use it in different hospitals and things like that. But it's not, oh, every hospital has it or everybody's using it. It's just the European Union and was a lot easier to get approval for medical devices up until 2017, 2018. They really changed it. But prior to that, all you had to prove was safety. So you just had to show that whatever you were selling was safe for use, which $100,000-$200,000, you could get that done, as opposed to $100 million in the United States for a class 3 de novo. And then you have the chance of it not getting approved on top of that. But their thought process was like, as long as it's safe, and we tell them they can't make any claims on the use of it, they can fund some studies and things with doctors, and then the doctors can talk about it, and then the doctors have access to this resource. And they changed this over since then. But anyway, it was much easier for Europe to onboard this, because in the United States, it'd be a class 3 de novo project, which is really hard to get. 100 million would probably be the bottom. Like top might be 250 million to get through that process. So you need to bring on a lot of investors. You need to have a really good business plan in place, something that's going to make a lot of money, because you're spending a lot of money in order to be able to get it through that.
That's incredible.
I know over the years, it's like you said, it has been changing, and I'd be interested to hear the way you break it down. But it went, from what I understood, was more of a minor to major autohemotherapy transition. But we ended up getting a 5-pass and then a 10-pass, and then obviously there's UBI ozone, and then there's EBO. Do you maybe just want to break that down for listeners just who are trying to understand how to maybe consume ozone and what other types of ways that they can go and do that?
Yeah. So ozone has a bad name. If you go online and look for it, people are going to say ozone is dangerous. Yeah. There is one place that you can't use it, and that is breathing ozone gas. Your lungs don't have an antioxidant defense system. So when you breathe in an oxidant, it oxidizes the lungs, which is causing irritation, breaking them down, and you don't want that. Personally, I feel comfortable with an ozone generator on in the room, not at super high doses, but if there's a little one putting out some. Even OSHA has, hey, you can have this much ozone in the room and it's safe to breathe. So it's not, and you can smell ozone at 5 parts per million, which is really easy to smell. Other stuff might be like 100 more times than that to be able to actually be able to smell the thing. So you can smell it far before it's reached the OSHA standard of safety for breathing, but you don't want to breathe ozone. So that is the one thing if you go and look online. But outside of that, like the blood has an antioxidant defense system. So the ozone gas goes in, it interacts with the antioxidants, and then it's all gone. Same thing for pretty much everywhere else in the body. As long as you're not breathing it, you're good. But there's 2 different places that ozone therapy is typically used. One is among home users that are doing self-treatment with it, and that can be used in a variety of different ways. There's systemic treatments that benefit the whole body, and then there's local treatments that are just for one area. So in the case of a skin infection, you're generally going to apply it right to that area, but it's not going to benefit the rest of the body. It might help with the antiseptic, the growth factors to stimulate healing and that kind of stuff. But then there's the systemic treatment. So there's IV, which obviously people aren't doing at home. And then there's the not so glamorous rectal and vaginal insufflation. The reason people do those, though, even though they're not the fun ones, or maybe if you're into that,
Fun ones, I don't know.
but yeah, so the reason people do those, though, is because they're a counterpart to the IV. So rather than having to go into the clinic and do IVs, which is better, you can get some of that same effect by doing one of those 2 things, the rectal or the vaginal insufflation. And that's just a small amount of gas that goes where the sun don't shine. That's how people are doing it at home. Or they might do into the ears for ear infection, head, nose, and throat issues. They might do onto the skin. Yeah, go.
When you said, sorry to interrupt, when you said onto the skin, is there like because I know you brought up oils previously, is it like a liquid that goes on to the skin for an infection? Or
There's 3 different ways that you
Please.
can apply it onto the skin.
Skin, there's ozone gas directly. You can infuse the gas into water, and then you have ozonated water, and then you have ozone oil. And by the way, I forgot to mention, but the reason you can't bottle an ozone gas tank and send it to somebody is you can't do that. But the reason for that is because ozone is very unstable, so it breaks down pretty quickly. So if I were to bottle it, within a couple hours, there would be no ozone in there. It'd just be oxygen, which coincidentally is also great for water purification. So like my hot tub at home, I have never used a chemical. It's just ozone.
How stable does
Interesting.
ozone stay in oils?
It stabilizes as a product. So about 2 to 3 years, depending on how stable it is. Yeah. Yeah. But those are the 3 different ways to use it on the skin.
Then
Cool.
direct
Wow.
to is using a bag too. You can put the bag over a certain part of the skin and then just funnel it in.
Yeah.
So essentially what the setup looks like is you have an oxygen tank, you have an ozone generator, and then you have whatever accessory is attached to the ozone generator. For example, a bag that goes over my arm. So I'd turn on my oxygen tank, turn on my ozone generator, and what that's doing is that's taking the oxygen, the ozone generator is converting the O2 into O3. And then there's ways that you can control like how much ozone is being made, so the dose of it. And then that would be feeding into a bag and putting the gas into there. That's essentially what the setup looks like.
They were using it on ulcers and
Wow,
like
that's what you're saying.
ginormous lacerations, and those things were healing quickly when I was seeing some case studies of that. Phenomenal.
Yeah, there's a lot of clinical trials on that too. It's one of those, that's one area, that and dentistry, like that it should be in every single wound care clinic and every single dental clinic, because it's like such a slam dunk. I mean, so again, for infections, it's really powerful. It's one of the most powerful anti-infection molecules that we know of. So if there's some sort of infection in the mouth, even like osteonecrosis of the jaw, which is where you have a tooth infection, the infection starts to drive deeper and can get into the jaw. And biological dentists can find that through their 3D cone beam scan. So those are things that you want to get rid of, right? But they will actually feed the ozone down either through a gas and then have a suction in the back of the throat so they're not breathing it, or swish the ozone water or apply the ozone oil, or all 3. So that as they're doing their procedures, a lot of the biological dentists that you can find on IOAMT.org, I think. Do you know that organization?
I got to get that from you because I'm looking for one.
guess.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so you can find them on that website. And you still have to do a little bit of vetting because they're just people that participated in the membership of this thing and go to the meetings and all that. But most of those people are pretty good. And yeah, they'll be using ozone as they're doing procedures for the infections that are present.
It's awesome.
And we've had a patient, actually a couple patients, that had an infection like the top roof of the mouth and then starting to bleed into the sinus cavity and to certain areas like brain centers. Would that be still okay, top versus bottom ozone wise, in terms of application from
top of the mouth?
yeah, like an infection on the top row, which is then bleeding into the sinus cavity and like deep.
There's different ways that they put it pretty much everywhere except into the lungs, and it depends on how much of a cowboy somebody is too. So if there's all sorts of protocols, all sorts of different ways of doing it. There's a couple things that there's one thing that I never recommend, and there's a couple things that it's not my favorite, but there's doctors out there. They're the doctor, all right? I'm just the guy here sitting in a chair that's read stuff. So they're the ones doing, I'm the one pretending. But so DIV ozone is where they take ozone gas and they just infuse it directly into the vein. My issue with that, even though it's really safe, there's doctors that have been doing it for 30 years, is that it's one of the few that has like regular adverse reactions to it, in the sense like you're putting gas directly into the lungs. So you'll get like the lung constriction and different things, and anxiousness, tight-chested, all that kind of stuff. And my issue with that is like, all right, so you're doing the one therapy that does have adverse reactions when you could just do major autohemotherapy where you draw the blood out first, put the gas in, now there's no gas in the blood, and you drip the blood back. And so like you get the same reaction, but none of the downside. And then EBU is one of those ones that I think it's a very nuanced therapy, meaning that if practitioners are just getting into it, it's not for everybody.
Right.
Very high dose. So people that are like really
procedure, right?
yeah, it's pretty lengthy, but people that are really sick, aren't detoxing very well, have a lot of environmental toxicity built up into their system, they may not respond to it very well, meaning it might make them feel worse. It's not going to severely hurt anybody that I'm aware of, but again, it's going to have adverse reactions for a percentage of people because it's such a high dose. Yeah. And then there's nasal insufflation, which is what I was going to point to. I do that to myself, okay? But I never advertise other people to do it because you have such a risk of breathing it into the lungs. Yeah. But what I do is I'll take, if I do have some sort of cold or infection, and I don't do it very often because I hate the sensation. I do ozone all the ways, but this is one of my least favorite, is I take a deep breath and then I'll push a little bit of ozone into each nostril and then push it out. But that really gets right into the sinus cavity.
We did that a lot with patients. We loved it. It was great.
Yeah.
I don't know if we had patients, I don't know if we plugged, I can't remember. But anyway, I know we did do exactly that and loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. The only reason I'm just not going to tell somebody to go do that on their own. If they're under a practitioner or medical provider.
Would oil in the nose, is that application something you could do?
It's going to stay in that area most likely. I don't know. I've seen people do that, especially around the 2020 infection. People were like just lathering up. Yeah.
Just curious. I know you mentioned rectal insufflation. We don't need to go into the big depths of it, but I think people are probably intrigued by its application, obviously, and then some of the things that it can help with. But are there certain things, or at least a background of the treatment itself, as far as what you've noticed or have been told by doctors that it does make a difference in patients that have certain conditions or those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's clinical trials on this too. You can go to metaskill.com is where we have a lot of information housed. So everything's cited, a lot of clinical trials, good writers, good medical board, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it's doing 4 things. It's mitigating chronic oxidative stress. It's modulating immune function. It's improving microcirculation, which is like blood flow to all parts of your body. So that could even be the brain or your fingertips or whatever is not getting proper blood flow, which is actually pretty important because your cells need to be able to bend and fold to fit through those tiny capillaries. And so it improves their ability to do that, and the flexibility, essentially, of the vessel. And then increasing anaerobic threshold, or I don't think I mentioned that, oxygen efficiency. So oxygen efficiency is cool because you have VO2, basically the volume of air that you're drawing in but that doesn't necessarily indicate how well you're using it. If you do a VO2 max, that kind of is. But if it doesn't, you can't necessarily just increase by doing nothing. You have to go and exercise, and you're going to increase that. But with people that are sick, that are incapable of exercising and that kind of stuff, or even for athletes, there are actually studies on this, where it increases oxygen efficiency. So that's the ability for your cells to take and deliver oxygen into areas that need it. Yeah, it's really helpful for a lot of stuff, but the 5 most common things that practitioners use it for would be cancer, Lyme, autoimmune infectious disease, and mold toxicity. So that would be the 5 most common. But again, I always recommend people go to a medical provider and talk with somebody who knows this stuff, because they're going to be able to walk them through. It needs to fit into some sort of context where it's like, maybe you're not at the starting place. Maybe you do need to do some of the detox or adjust some of the lifestyle things before you can get into this.
I know some people that are wanting to do this for themselves, they end up just doing it at home, like you said, where they don't have to go into the practitioner, and they can just go and do this at home. And I've never done it. I've been tempted to do it just because I know we've done it with a lot of patients, but I myself, I guess I never really needed it. But it's quite easy. It sounds a little more scary than maybe you'd think, but really you're just turning the machine on, it ozonates, the bag is then connected to a cannula, and then you're just pushing that into the area. That's pretty much how it goes, correct?
Yeah, so for rectal insufflation, it's a small bag, essentially 200 mil, which is like this much. I don't know how you can shape the amount of gas, but it's not a lot. And then, yeah, that's connected to a catheter. It goes in a few inches, and then they just roll down the bag, and that's the whole treatment. So it takes 5 minutes or less once people are used to it. The first time setting up the oxygen tank, the ozone generator, and just getting your bearings might take 45 minutes. But then after that, it's 5 minutes per session.
Has
That's
there been
great.
negative effects through that application that you?
Yeah, so people that are sensitive are the ones that, so if they have like general sense, like you would know if you're a sensitive person generally. If you have sensitivities to various foods, various fragrances, etc., you might be sensitive to ozone too. And what that is they have a low antioxidant capacity. So with ozone, you do want to stay below somebody's antioxidant capacity. So essentially, if I put in ozone oxidants that go over the antioxidant capacity, I'm then causing not just that mild acute oxidative stress, but a little bit of oxidative stress too. So people with a low antioxidant threshold, generally people that are sensitive, yeah, they can have some fatigue from that, discomfort in the guts, etc. So I've never seen anything really severe from it, but if you are a sensitive person, you don't want to feel worse. Some people call it a Herxheimer reaction. I feel like that gets loosely applied to everything, but
Sure. And that can be a bit extreme. You don't usually get that with rectal insufflation, I've found, but anyway.
yeah, so you can get some negative effects from it, but generally that's among the more sensitive. But there's protocols for that. So basically you work it up, and then you increase your antioxidant threshold to where you're able to tolerate more.
Perfect.
I
I like
know-
how you explained that too.
I know Lyme's
Oh.
patients, it's like the only thing that has helped their fatigue from what I was experiencing in clinic, especially through IV. And I know you had mentioned that too. You had mentioned that IV was a little more efficient than,
Yeah, I think so. I think the insufflation is going to have more effects on the gut that can be positive directly, which is really important. So I don't want to underplay that. But I think I don't know, there's quite a bit of literature out there, but I wish there was one just comparing the two side by side for the same indication, but there's not. But my best guess is you're probably going to get a more potent effect from the IV. But I don't think the insufflation would be too far behind. I'm just not sure by what degree.
well, both are relatively direct into the tissues, just, I guess, a different stamp.
And when you put it into the gut, it doesn't just stay in the gut. It is absorbed through the mucosal wall, goes into the portal vein, and goes throughout the body. So that's why it's systemic.
All right. Micah, you have a new project. I shouldn't say new. It's been a couple years since you've been
Mhm.
involved with Therium, but yeah, you maybe just want to dive a little bit into multi-omics and maybe some of the omics that you guys obviously measure, and then why you measure them, and obviously what does that give you data-wise on as far as a human being and to use that knowledge?
Yeah. So this is like planets away from ozone therapy. So we're taking a big stretch into this thing way over here. But the bridge between those two things for me, on ozone, I've spent lots of time talking with doctors, lots of time talking with patients, thousands of hours on the phone with people about their specific stuff. and trying to figure out with them and the doctors and different things. But one thing I noticed in the industry is you go to a conference and everybody in the vendor hall and the speakers, they're all hammers, meaning that they have something like a red light bed or a PEMF machine or whatever it is. Can be actually a very good modality, but they look at all the issues that people are facing through the lens of PEMF or through the lens of red light therapy or through the and so what that creates for people on the other side is a lot of confusion. Like, what is going to be the most effective for me? What is going to help me the most? And, is there a way to validate this? Because a lot of people are just trying to figure out how to get better. But when everybody's a hammer, it's really confusing because everybody's got the solution. And then you have to figure out how to make sense of all that and who to trust and that kind of stuff. That was the issue I was noticing in the industry at large, which still exists. But I came across this guy named Dr. Jasby a couple of years ago. He was just doing some research at ASU here, and he has some publications on like early Alzheimer's detection. So finding it like really early on, which is important. But I was just really impressed with some of the work that he was doing. Then as we started to talk more, got into kind of the utility of getting data on what's happening in your body and how that correlates to what you should do or what you should not do is also just as important. So basically what happened with that, and we'll get more into the technicals on multi-omics and that kind of stuff, but basically what happened with that is we saw an opportunity of, hey, we can provide a lot of information on people's biology, and then we can now map that to what is going to be the most effective for them. We don't have a full list complete. There might be some type of red light therapy or green light therapy that we don't have mapped in here, but we're working on getting as much in there as we can. In the future, I anticipate this being like, once we get approval and go through the processes and kind of Trojan horse it a little bit, that we'll be able to advise that chemotherapy at this dose might be the best in this very localized area or not at all. Rather than
For each person, you're saying. So you simulate this external for what it could happen internally for a person.
Yeah, so what we do, it's called digital twinning. So we get a lot of information on a person, and then we create a replica of that person digitally. And then we have these therapies, these interventions, supplements, et cetera, that we've mined information on. So we understand their impact on metabolism and metabolic profiles. And then we take those and map it to the digital twin, and we run simulations, like how much of a dose, how long should they be doing it, all that kind of stuff, to see how it affects their metabolic profile. And we do each intervention that we have banked, which is over 1,300 right now. Each one gets simulated 1,000 times. Yeah, we're doing like tons of trial and error digitally, which isn't going to be perfect, but it's going to be much better than just doing trial and error myself. Right. So it really speeds up that. And then especially the first time, it's going to be making assumptions on you based on somebody else's data. But the second time, now it's based on your own data and how your body responded in particular. So it gets better with time, the more you retest. But that's essentially what our test does. And the solution that we offer to people is that, hey, we'll take a look at a ton of data, a ton of information. We have 68% of known human metabolism in our panel, which the next closest thing, if you compiled 6 comprehensive metabolic blood panels, would be like 19%. So we're like almost 50% more in terms of the breadth of data that we cover. And then the solution, though, is that we tell you what we think is going to be the most effective for you. And we make zero money on anything that's recommended. We're always going to keep that. And the reason that's really important is because if I start selling supplements and I'm telling you which supplements to take, I'm going to tell you to take my supplements, even if they're not the best for you. And so that's a huge issue in the industry of testing, is everybody's gone in because there's a lot of money in supplements. And once people do a test, they might not even have good ones. In fact, I know of some companies who have not very good supplements, and they'll just recommend people to take them because it's what they have, not necessarily what's best for the individual. Yeah, it's been this really interesting world to get into. It's very academic. Something that I learned is there's nobody that's standing on this golden plateau looking down at everybody else because they just have so much information and knowledge on how things work. Like, they don't have it figured out there, in academia. And so now we're all just trying to, get together and figure this thing out. I'm very rubber meets the road. I have traction, boots on the ground kind of guy. So bringing these really complicated concepts and data collection and all that kind of stuff down to like, how do we get this to really move the needle on medicine?
And there's a few parts that you study. I'm sure some of them people have heard of, some of them haven't, but I know the genome is one of them. The microbiome is another one. Was there some others that you take a look at?
Yeah, so this is getting into the topic of multi-omics. So right now we're primarily focused on metabolism. Omics just is referring to, it's like a big layer. So like in your body, you have various layers of biology. You could say, I'll just keep it more simple. So you have your microbiome, you have your metabolism, your epigenetics, your proteins, and your genetics. Those are all like different layers within your body. So usually when somebody's testing something like the microbiome, that requires a certain type of sample collection, meaning they actually have to look at your poo to know what's actually in there, right? And that's going to be different from like metabolism, which is going to be looking at blood. And then a lot of times genetics is just like a buccal swab. So it's pretty easy for them to get that. So there's these different sample collection methods that reflect like the different layers of you. But the issue that currently exists, and this is like really cutting edge stuff. So there's like a lot of science on, we really wish this exists. We really want this to exist. And a lot of people trying to figure it out. But multi-omic integration is when you take all of those layers and you make sense of how they connect to each other. Because right now, nobody has, this is how this person's metabolic profile exactly correlates to their genetics, or this is how this person's microbiome information correlates to their metabolism. But the reason that's we're holistic beings. So that's really important to understand, because if I just look at you through the lens of genetics, all the different versions of Addy that you could be, it's not going to give me all the information about what's going to be best for you. So if I have all that data on those layers, then I'm going to be much more effective, because I'm going to say, okay, here's his genetic profile, here's his microbiome, but the issue is actually in how his proteins are folding here. And we found upstream or downstream from that, if we make a modification here, that's going to fix this. So you get like really pinpoint precision on things. And nobody has mapped all this together, because you have, it hasn't been possible until AI. It was viewed as this thing that would be a nice future thing, but it came like a lot quicker than we anticipated with AI, because now that can really go through and do all this pattern recognition that a human mind could not do. If I got all that data on you, I would not be able to map that together for many years, just one person. And so with AI, now you can do that in seconds, right? You can map that all together. But we have a lot of work to do yet, because it's this very cutting edge thing that nobody has really quite figured out. We have the microbiome and the metabolism that are now integrated on the back end. We haven't yet launched that to public, but we're the first company in the market to actually have some sort of full multi-omic integration. Some people will say they have multi-omics, but they'll have 2 biomarkers in the metabolism and then 5 in the microbiome. And that the issue with that is it's like looking at this as opposed to the whole picture. We have 1,300 interventions. We have 68% of known human metabolism. And then the microbiome, we're getting down to strain level specificity, which is really good, because you can have various types of salmonella. So if you find out you have salmonella, it might be bad and it might just not really matter.
Right.
And that's something you're not going to know unless you look at the strain. And then that same thing for all the different species.
So is that how you look at trends of symptoms versus the actual cause, like, of symptomology for that person when you look at all the layers, especially based on like how circuits are put together on a person? When you add into that like second person of everything that you upload through AI, you just run through, I'm sure it gets really technical, but when you put all this together, it's almost like you have to connect layers via different circuits to have everything blend together. as
Almost
one.
like if you had 1,000 Alzheimer's data, and do you see that trend? Is there trends that you can look for having this data?
As far as disease coverage and that kind of thing?
Yeah, because it's tough to, I'm sure, look at this data and actually have like you said, it's 60%. You still have some building of the full person to go, but do you plan on having trends to where you can see change in data of, let's say, 1,000 Alzheimer's patients, and can you see why, or can you see where did the part of the body go wrong to have that happen? If that makes sense?
Sure. Yeah, we're not doing, so it's how do we get to the root cause of what is causing Alzheimer's is the question? Okay. Yeah, so we're not doing disease recognition right now until we get approval, because we're just not going to be able to operate with that. Some of the research that he's done using the same materials and methods, he has early detection of various diseases that he's done. So if you look up Panise Jasmine on Google Scholar, you'll find Alzheimer's, you'll find very early stage cancers and different things that he's been able to identify through a similar methodology used. But as far as finding root cause, it's going to be a variety. You need a variety of, we're never going to get to the point, in my opinion, that it's just based on somebody's biological data. It just doesn't tell the full story. I think while it's really important, it's never going to give the full scope. You still need to understand what does a person's lifestyle look like, which is why because you need to be able to correlate that. For example, if we find and it's getting more specific, but this is just a good example for now because it just doesn't have the specificity quite yet. If there's a certain type of heavy metal in the person, if we have information on the person's lifestyle, say they were a dentist, then we're saying, okay, it's between these 3 heavy metals, but we're not sure which one. So therefore, the most likely one is actually going to be mercury because they're a dentist. And so you're always going to require the use of other sources of information to be able to really find root cause. I don't think it's ever going to be just through labs, regardless of how complicated it gets into the future. You need to understand the person as a whole. So that being said, as far as getting down to root cause, you can still identify, say in the microbiome, that there's some dysfunctional shift that's happened over time that then is causing some sort of neurocognitive decline, right? And we might be able to go through and look and say, okay, this species is overpopulated, this species is underpopulated, therefore we're going to drop in this species and strain to be able to put that into equilibrium. And yeah, then you're getting into kind of the physical aspects that hopefully identify the root of the issue. But there's also the other root of the issue, which is what is a person's habit and lifestyles. Because if they're smashing a 5th of liquor every day, it's not going to matter if you're putting in a...
Sorry.
Yeah, it's not going to matter. But I think what it does, though, psychologically for people is it really builds a lot of credibility and it builds a lot of compliance. I told you guys, I was really into working out, had a big injury, and then quit working out and got fat. And then one of the things I did in order to come out of that is I put some social pressure on myself. So I love leveraging social pressure just for me to build habits because I find that to be really helpful. So I did this during COVID. I did this workouts competition with my family. So it was I had this big spreadsheet that was a Google sheet that everybody could log how much they did per day. And it was just how many squats did you do? How many push-ups, pull-ups, etc. And they all had a point system attributed to it. So over 4 weeks, and we had teams, whoever scored the most won. So but what that did yeah, my brother almost I put it on, so I had to. Yeah. I was doing 2 hours a day of just crushing body weight workouts to a point that it was bad because my elbow got a little bit messed up from the repetition of push-ups and pull-ups. But anyway, I got in really good shape. But yeah, my brother almost caught up on the last day. And then I remember I was tomorrow is not going to be a race. So I'm going to finish this. This was the night before the last day. I was I don't want us to be neck and neck because then because he doesn't upload until 11:50. So you just have to work out all day, not knowing how much he did. So I was just I'm just going to finish it tonight. So I worked out for 2 hours at 10 p.m. or something. Yeah, just to be I am so far up. So then the next day I could just do the normal day. But anyway, that's an example of leveraging information and it increased my compliance. Once I saw things in data and once I saw, what I needed to do, it really just dialed me into working out. So I went from being overweight to losing a ton of weight. And even at that time got gaunt and stuff, which probably was a little bit too much working out that I was doing. But it really increased my compliance. It changed my psychology. And so I think where labs, the thing that people don't talk about as much is just that data and information creates so much trust that you just want to follow through with it. And I do that for myself. I hope other people do it for themselves too. But I wouldn't underestimate, if you're a medical provider, just what that can do for I'm sure you guys have seen that. You can know something about somebody. I already knew that. It's just, I'm going to run a lab. They're going to see, hey, your blood is telling you what I told you. And then they're like, oh, really? I'm going to do that.
Well, objective
Yes.
data is non-arguable because we can't fake it. Maybe you can with AI now, but the best example we have is we throw what normal x-rays look up next to their x-rays, and if it's obliterated, degenerative change, all the obviously things that they don't want, it's pretty quick that anybody can find the difference, right? Like the game, and they very quickly know what's wrong without even us having to tell them that, because you can make that stuff up for yourself, obviously, when you see what normal looks like, obviously, versus what it doesn't. And that's powerful. And that's exciting, because I know that physicians can, and I'm sure there's other ways that I'm going to start to look into utilizing something like this too, where it's instead of having them go through a course of care this many sessions versus going through a course of care with doing this, and then we might have higher efficiency doing one way versus the other. We're saving time. We're more efficient. Patients are getting better quicker without having to go through trials of whatever modality, one which way or the other. I guess that's just me thinking off the cuff of how to utilize this technology, but am I on point to how this could be utilized, I guess, with other physicians?
Yeah, so it's going to reduce the trial and error.
Yeah.
So it reduces some of the guesswork. So rather than trying various things and seeing what works, it's going to cut that down. A lot of practitioners, though, have really dialed in what they do already. So I think, for example, we have some really high-level physicians. Like they apply the same structure to, say there's a person that comes in with a particular ailment or issue. Like 70% of what they apply is going to be the same across all people with that ailment. But then it's like that 30%, how do you approach that? How do you get quicker results? And so it's just diminishing the trial and error of, do I do this or that or the other thing? However, like I said, right now we don't have certain things logged into that. So it's not going to have coverage on all the different recommendations that can be done. But it's not quite at the point of you need to walk your dog for 12 minutes at 2:02 a.m. and then go sit in the Salt River for 3 minutes. But it's progressing towards that, but yeah. So yeah, we have a lot of doctors who have onboarded it that are using it quite a lot. And then, yeah, it's been out there for a year and a half, but it's this developing thing. Like I said, the multi-omics is like, eventually we're going to have genetics, epigenetics, proteins. We currently have the metabolism and we currently have the microbiome, but eventually we're going to have all that in one spot. But it's pretty well reserved. Like it's really expensive if we run that full sequence of things because we don't have it like at scale. So like we do it on a very individualized basis where our scientists are actually doing like a N of 1 study on somebody for a year. But that's a really expensive one that we have for like professional athletes and that kind of thing.
Incredible. And that's therio.me, right?
Yeah, it's a weird domain.
No worries. No, that's how I found it, actually. No, that's awesome. I'm going to look, obviously, a lot more into this, too. I think data is just so easy. Practitioners to get that trust that they deserve with the patients. And, of course, being able to see that stuff in real time is just going to make things a lot easier. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what the next 5 years looks like for you guys, obviously, and what that looks like in utilization too. But
yeah, and I know for comfort of the listeners at home, data and privacy, I know we touched on this a little bit before the pod too, but just to share with them, how are you utilizing some of the data that you would get from the patient, and how do you keep that privacy for not only for patients or the people, but for everyone for that matter?
Yeah. So I'm going to retrace a little bit into my own story so that I can draw together why we're doing this. But yeah, I got into this because I really want to move the needle on medicine. Like my thought process was like, if my brother Matt, who lived with us 18 years longer than anticipated, but he did pass away. And I'm really thankful for the life he had. He lived a lot longer than anybody expected by a mile. But the thought process is, what if I could have gotten more information on what would have been helpful for him at the time and potentially had even more time with him or remediation? I don't know. And so my thought process was like, I really want to find something that moves the needle, not just for me, but for other people, because that is a very tangible aspect of parents being around for their kids, grandparents being around for their grandkids, brothers, sisters, whatever it is. So that's like a very real effect that happens, and I see as being super duper important. So that being said, I don't care about selling data. That's not what I'm here for. I want to make a living, but I do not care to maximize that for the purpose of myself. I think one of the issues out there currently is that you go to 23andMe, you give them your genetic data, and then they sell it to just whoever, right? That goes to the government, that goes to pharmaceutical companies for drug targeting models that they're creating and that kind of stuff. I don't really want to get into any kind of black box situation where we're taking people's data and selling it, because what I really want to do is build trust with people. And that's much, much more important to me. So what we're doing right now is, A, we're not selling data, but B, it's stored offline. So all the raw data isn't even on the internet. And then what we're planning on doing, though, which I think is cool, we're going to give people ownership of their own data and information. And then how do you do that? Like, how do you give me your blood? I do a test, and then you actually technically own all the information from that. Blockchain is a great answer for that, because then we can take it automatically goes there, and then we can send you the keys to that, and then we can actually access it without your permission. So the cool part about that is it's very transparent. If anybody accesses it, you'll have to give permission for it. And then if there was a situation where data could be sold for the purpose of advancing science or a particular target, like a certain supplement protocol, that company would come to us, we would vet it out to see if it's something that even fits, and then we would kick that back to you. Hey, do you want to sell your data to this person? We'll take a brokerage fee, like a small amount of that, but then ultimately it's between you, and you know exactly who it's going to and how many times within that company it's accessed, and it can't go outside of that either. So it has some really cool utilities like that. Blockchain has a good and a bad rap. I think a bad rap around people who don't understand it, but it is a really cool technology that can be utilized for some stuff like that. Could really create a lot more transparency and a lot more ownership over items like that.
And I know a lot of people don't even do that kind of thing because they don't want people to have their data and sell it. They just have that. They have that in them. They just don't want to have that leverage, and I think that's incredibly noble. And when I remember first reading that article, I think it was a GlaxoSmithKline that bought 23andMe's DNA compilation, and I don't forget all that stuff. I can remember reading that stuff. I can remember when I noticed the shift of those kinds of things happening. And so to hear that you are focused on that, it's really awesome. And I think a lot of people should be excited that they can know and trust that their data isn't going to be sold, or they at least have not only that, but now you're giving them access back to that data to have if they wanted to sell that anyway. That's incredible. So
very noble. So what does the roadmap look like for this company for months, years to come? What does that look like from there?
If you're comfortable sharing any of the fun
Yeah,
stuff.
no, I mean, we're a pretty open book.
We do everything very transparently. You can find all our materials and methods, and exactly how we do it is published. So anybody can access it. You know, there's some things that we don't publish, which is how we translate information and actually doing the multi-omics. But eventually that'll be published. Eventually that'll be published too, because there's a possibility we get smoked by some other big company, and well, we'll still be in business, so we'll catch the tailwind of that, which is fine. Anyway, I do anticipate like all that will be open source at some point. I just don't know when. We just need to make some more progress. And then, but yeah, as far as where that goes in the future, I think it's going to get really insightful into exactly what people could be doing for their health. So hopefully getting into some sort of approval processes. And I alluded to it, but how do we get, so you have an institution of things that really is not very well trusted. It's become very polarized. And there's, again, that paradigm thinking where people within the institution only see that. People outside of it only see it as a bad thing. It's actually a very much a mixed bag of stuff. But globally speaking, it's a mostly mistrusted institution. So I think the idea is, how can you create something alongside it that's better, that makes it easy for people to participate in and have a better solution for it? Because in an institution, you can reform it from the inside, meaning that you're actually like changing it, or you can build something next to it that's better. And that's what we're trying to do. And so that's like the long-term mission. We'll see what happens. That's talking on a really big scale of where we have something that's just far better, far superior. Therefore, like everybody is required to use it in order to get the results that we can get. But we'll see where it goes. Even if it helps 1,000 people, that's great too. So we'll see where it goes. We're trying.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
We just had a few other topics here to end just because we were curious. We talk a lot about cold plunging on our podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that you're a cold plunger.
Let's go.
And then just a couple other things as far as your own health. I know you said you've been really fit, fat, all that, and then got back to being fit. We know you're a cold plunger, Micah. We love talking about cold plunging. So when did you get into cold plunging, and do you still do it often? Are you doing that every day, or try to do that weekly?
I haven't been here because I don't have access to.
Sure.
So I'm in Phoenix right now, and
Yeah.
I live in Michigan, and I have my setup there. But I've been here for a couple weeks. But yeah, I'm doing it lately, like 2 to 4 times a week, depending on the week. So it hasn't been every day. So I got into it first. I don't remember the exact time frame, so don't hold me to it. So if you see in writing it says 8 years, and I say 7 years, it's the ballpark of things. Okay, around 7.
Pretty good.
Yeah, around 7 years ago, I got into it, and it was by accident. I had asthma, and we stay up in Washington with near my wife's family for a couple months out of the year. Really beautiful area in the Olympic Peninsula. You got a lot of rivers that are really cold that are melt, and then you got the canal, the Hood Canal, which is connected to the ocean. So anyway, whole family's out there, everybody's swimming, that kind of thing. It's 90 degrees outside. I jump into the water. And then I can't remember who I was talking to, but I remember trying to talk to somebody and just lungs are constricted and I can't get the words out. And I'm like, this sucks. Like I jump into, on a hot day, like some mildly cool water and my asthma flares up to where I can't like speak. And so I never used an inhaler or anything. I would get tight chested to the point that I would vomit. And I was just like, I'm not doing the inhaler. I just like intuitively felt like that would make me weaker. So I just decided not to ever do that. But what I decided to do at that point is I was like, I wonder if I can condition myself at least for cold water. So then when I go swimming in something that's not bath water, I can still at least breathe.
Sure.
So I started just jumping in the canal more, taking cold showers as cold as they would go. So nothing crazy, cold baths, but then we're there for the summer. So I'm doing that at the house. I noticed I would do some deep breathing prior and then afterwards do some more deep breathing. But I would notice, like, because I was doing some breathing before and after, it felt a lot easier afterwards for some reason when I had that very intentional practice of going through it. And over time, that just got better and better. But then we would go up into the mountains and really cold water, just jump in there for a minute or a couple seconds or whatever. And I was like, I like this. You get that euphoric feeling. I'm starting to actually my lungs seem to be getting stronger, or whatever's happening seems to be getting better. So that like just really started to sell me on it. And after just doing that for long enough, I no longer was wheezing when I would run or had any symptoms of asthma thereafter. And I don't know if it's gone, could come back. I have no idea, but the symptoms are gone and they have been gone for many years now. I was just like, this works really well.
Question for you on that. So
Yeah.
I think I saw in your cold plunge at home, do you have an ozone generator into the water for that?
Yeah, so I have a Morozco forge, and they have one built in, and then I have this giant ozone generator that I use for the hot tub too. And so that ozone sterilizes the water, and I don't need to use any chemicals in the hot tub or the ice bath or anything, which is cool. So once the ozone is used, it just reverts back to oxygen. So it's just oxygen in there.
Did you ever notice any metabolic or muscular change with the cold plunging? Did you ever notice like an uptick in performance or ability to put muscle on? Or was there any change there that you noticed when you were cold plunging?
Yeah, I wasn't like actively trying to put on muscle that I recall, but yeah, like doing it before a workout though, like big performance boost for sure. So, and it's not every time, but it was a noticeable difference to when you do it prior to working out. You don't seem to run out of gas as easily. And it's just like sometimes you go and work out and you're like, I feel good today. It's like it made that feeling happen a lot more often. Yeah, that was my experience with that and working out. Tom Seeger, who owns Morozco Forge, has a lot of stuff associated with. He's in town here. Yeah. He's a professor at ASU.
Heck, man, I have to give him a call.
Yeah.
No, I love his his case studies he always shares are so cool. Seeing the before and after, a lot of it was interesting on just the change in testosterone that some of these men are sending him as far as pre and post 1 year of you in cold plunge. Phenomenal stuff. So cool to see.
Yeah, that's another example of a stress response therapy. Is it good to sit in an ice bath for a day? No, you'll die. But if you do it for a short enough time and a right dose, you'll actually get stronger, get faster, get rid of asthma or whatever. I got rid of asthma. I don't know if you will, but you get a really beneficial response from doing something that is a stressor.
Do you remember how long it took for you to remember seeing changes with the asthma? Just by chance, if you remember, it's okay if you don't.
I mean, it was within a month because I was there. I remember like doing the cold showers and cold baths and that kind of stuff and having a noticeable difference. And that was within a month of being there because I remember the family event was in July, which means we had been there for a month and then we were there for another month afterwards or so. Yeah.
That's I'm going to use that with patients, but I don't care. I'm just going to do that.
And I know like I have asthma too, and symptoms have improved. Not like completely, like with some of the allergens in the environment, there's still some sensitivity, like when I exercise outside. But yeah, I can definitely test that as well too. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I don't know why it worked for me in that regard. It just did. Like I wasn't seeking it out. Like I said, I was just like, I wonder if I can make my lungs stronger. So when I go into cold, I didn't expect like wheezing to go away when I was running or anything like that. So I have no idea why it worked. I had some videos go viral on Instagram for ice baths back when the algorithm was tripping those. And I probably had between comments and messages, like 200 people say the same thing. And so I don't know in what situations it works or why, but it seems like there's a group of people with asthma. It might be a certain type or a certain root cause issue, like we were saying, that's causing it, that ice baths remediate. And I don't pretend to know a lot about it. This is just my personal experience and what I've seen.
Anecdotal evidence.
And a one all day long. I don't care. That's cool. Is there any other health hacks or therapies that you like to use daily, weekly, monthly, just by chance?
I like isoalpha, which is like a nootropic. So it uses isoalpha acids, which are derived from hops, the plant, like that's used in beer. Yeah, but you take those and stimulates the vagus nerve. You get a release in norepinephrine, acetylcholine, a lot of good brain chemicals, but they actually have some really like world-class studies on this stuff, and they've even grown back gray matter from people taking it orally. For people that, people like alcoholic and stuff, brain shrinks. How do you grow that back? Usually you can't, but that's a really good one.
Yeah. What is something, and I always love asking this question, what is something you're generally curious about in anything in life, whether it's momentary or just broad term speaking?
Yeah, what it'll be like meeting God. I don't know. I think it'll be awesome, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, just think on that, doing that, try to make sure I'm living my life in a way that's consistent with, I think, how God designed us to be. So yeah, if you're talking about the biggest thing that I can think of, that's probably it. Looking forward to hearing the name he has for me.
That's beautiful, man. And then the other one I had is, what is the longest habit you've maintained and why?
Taking a shower in the morning and drinking a cup of coffee in the morning, and that's it. I'm been impulsive and inconsistent person in some respects. Although I'm productive because I work a lot, I'm not somebody that like habituates the same pattern over and over. So there's certain things that I like journaling, I'm really consistent with, educating, but the way I educate myself will be different. Sometimes it's through people who are experts, sometimes it's through books, sometimes it's through YouTube, sometimes it's through doing all sorts of different facets. So like more the principles apply, but the way that I do it, it changes every 3 to 6 months, just depending on I don't know. I don't know how to classify that, but impulsive.
So
You like to switch it up.
Almost like in seasons.
I really admire people who are like, I wake up at 3:30 every day and I do the same thing over and over and over for the last 40 years. I'm like, that's awesome. I wish I was more like that, but I'm not.
Like Mark Wahlberg status, where he's like in bed by 7 and up at 3 every day. It's crazy.
The rocks there too.
Yeah, I'll do that for a season, but that's done after 3-4 months, and then I find some other way to experience life, and it's different.
I think that's all.
Absolutely. So where can people find some information? Do you want to give any plugs to, because I know you give a couple of those already, but do you just want to say where they can find you at, social media, websites, anything like that at all?
Yeah, so the Ozone website is metaskill.com. The Therion website is therio.me. And then my Instagram is Micah for Health.
Perfect.
That's really it.
Yeah. Is doctorsozone.com still going on for doctors to learn more about utilization of?
No, Metaskill is a great source of information.
Perfect. Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
If you guys have found any insight from today, like Micah is an awesome source of knowledge on all topics, not even just the ones we've talked on today. So if you have questions, comments, leave them below. Reach out to him. Definitely subscribe to all of his channels, social media wise. Definitely help support the cause, because this is an avenue to where it's going to change the healthcare industry. And we're just really early at it, and we're just very fortunate that we got spend some
Yeah,
time.
seriously, thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on.
Yeah.
Seriously, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys soon. Until next time.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Take care, man.
Disclaimer: the content provided in this health podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast is solely at your own risk. The creators and hosts of this podcast are not responsible for any actions or decisions you may take based on the information presented.
Thanks for joining us on The Functional Code. For more evidence-based health insights, subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, your journey to a healthier you begins with understanding the functional code. Until next time, stay well, stay informed, and embrace the science of living well.